Certainly to be scared has been part of the human nature since its very beginnings.
What Alien says about us now are those fears that we have, which may be those fears that show up when we're dreaming, the nightmares.
I think he took a lot of techniques from Alfred Hitchcock in the sense that you don't really see everything. The imagination is used, and I think that's what made it so terrifying.
I think once you're making a movie, you better keep that pressure on all the way through. On anything, actually. But God knows on a thriller, or God knows it's a marathon of tension.
And intuitively, I knew that it was a thing I wanted to do more than anything. But the raising I had, my background, didn't suggest that that was a practical thing to do for a living.
I was a theater arts major in college. I wasn't a film major at UCLA. And I did love theater, but I realized after a while, after producing a couple of plays, that I had to stay in New York because that's where the investors are. And I hated the weather so much that the closest thing to theater was film. And I grew up in LA, so I decided, the hell with that. I'm not going to live in that freezing cold. I'll go into film.
I applied to USC, NYU, UCLA. NYU, UCLA blew me off. USC accepted. So I came out there, and I was a student in the USC Department of Cinema. Met up with John Carpenter. John Carpenter started to do this master's thesis film, a science fiction movie. I got involved in it, and it grew out of hand. It finally got too big for a student movie, and so in the end, we ended up finding a way to put it into theaters. And instead of the most impressive student film ever made, we had the least impressive professional film ever made. A lot of things bothered me about Dark Star. We had an alien in it, which was a beach ball. It was our second try on that alien. I went away from Dark Star really wanting to do an alien that looked real. A couple of years down the line, I decided to do Dark Star as a horror movie instead of a comedy. And that was the germ of Alien.
We got to talking, I realized that Dan was a cinema student at USC, and it was in the process of making a kind of a spoof on 2001, a small film called Dark Star. And he was surprised to find that that was my secret love, was film, and particularly fantastic cinema always attracted me. So basically, I helped out on Dark Star.
I had heard about Dark Star, and somebody was telling me about these two brilliant young guys, and sci-fi was my love, really. I also like suspense, but I went to see Dark Star, and I spoke to Carpenter on the phone, and I spoke to Dan on the phone. But it seemed to me I just had a more rapport with Dan just from the phone conversations, and I told him I had the rights to what became Total Recall, which was the original story by Phil Dick, was called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. So he knew the story. He said, I love that. Yeah, he said, you got the rights to that? I said, yeah. He said, okay, and I got something I got to discuss with you that I have been working on about a year, and I need to make a breakthrough. And maybe you're the guy that can make me have it happen. And that turned out to be Alien.
I had this opening. I didn't know where it was going to go. I knew I wanted to do a scary movie on a spaceship with a small number of astronauts. Like I say, Dark Star is a horror movie instead of a comedy. And I had this creepy opening in which astronauts awaken to find that their voyage home has been interrupted. They're receiving a signal from this mysterious planetoid in an alien language. They go down to investigate. They get stalled down there. Their ship breaks down.
I've got 29 pages written, but I don't know you. I can't trust you to leave the house with this. The story, I, of course, know, you have nothing written in the story. I said, no, I've just got the rights to the story. I hadn't yet tried to write it yet. And he said, okay, will you sit here and just read this? And this is what I got. I'm stuck on it, frankly, but read this. So I sat there and I read it, and it was very close to what we actually ended up with on the screen, those first 29 pages.
The threat at the center of the story, whatever this monster or thing or danger was going to be, it was not at all clear to me at this point.
The first act is fantastic. I said, oh, possibly, maybe I can help you with it. And he said, okay, I can help you in Total Recall. So we decided, however, that we would tackle Alien first because Total Recall would be way more expensive, because at that time we envisioned Alien could be a Roger Corman movie, just in one location, several different rooms in an old warehouse.
A Chilean filmmaker named Alejandro Jodorowsky telephoned me from Paris. Was it Paris, France? Or Paris, Texas? No, Paris, France. He had made an art film called El Topo, which was very well received. And this man, over this transatlantic phone line, claimed that he had the backing and the rights to make a feature film of Dune.
And he loved Dan's work that he did on designing the special effects for Dark Star. And he knew he had to do it at a budget with some creative people. So he hired Dan to work on it, help him with the storyline and also with the special effects. And Dan went off within a few weeks. He went off to Paris and France and places and was working on the Dune project there for 6 months.
And I wasn't the only person there. He had gone to England and he had plucked up an artist who did covers for science fiction books named Christopher Foss. And for the first time, I saw somebody whose stuff I liked as much as Ron Cobb's stuff. He had another artist he wanted me to meet. He had seen this guy's work in a show that was in Paris at the time. Took me over to one of the really fancy hotels in Paris, not the one I was staying in, where this artist named Hans Rudy Giger was staying while his show was on display in Paris. Giger brings out this little tinfoil. He said, "Would you like some opium?" I said, "Why do you take that?" He said, "I am afraid of my visions." He said, "It's only your mind." He said, "That is what I'm afraid of." He brings out a book, an art book, with his paintings in it. I started looking at this, and he and Alejandro go into a big discussion about Dune. I started looking at these paintings, and it took a minute for it to register what I was seeing, but what I was seeing seemed to be very disturbing.
Oft-told story of that was Dan, of course, working on the Jodorowsky Dune in Paris for a year or two, and it all collapsed, and he went home with no money and whatever it is, and slept on Ron Shusett's couch.
And I was in desperation. The only thing I could think to do, I had to sell a script.
So he said, "Now light up the board, Ron. I've got this first act, and you like it." And he says, I know, you have a good mind from these just weeks and weeks I've worked with you before I left, and what I saw you did on Total Recall, which you did the short story. As far as you got it, I know you can make the breakthrough for me.
Well, Star Beast is one of those titles that you think of, and then you throw them away. I was running through titles, and they all stank. I didn't like any of them. One morning at 3 o'clock, Ronnie's apartment, I'm typing away, writing dialogue, and the characters are saying the alien this and the alien that, and suddenly that word alien just sort of came up out of the typewriter at me. I said, alien. It's a noun and it's an adjective. I said, yes, that's it. I have the title.
It's simple. It's one word, and no one's ever used it. And never changed from that moment on. No one ever tried. The title stuck, and that was amazing to us, even just that aspect of it.
I went to storage, got my typewriter out, took it over to Ronnie Shusett's living room, and wrote it up. Over the days and nights of the next 3 months, Ron keeping me alive by feeding me hot dogs.
Dan said, somehow the monster has to get on board the ship in a way that'll amaze everybody. And so I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, Dan, I have an idea. And he said, what? And I said, the monster screws one of the people. He says, what? What are you talking about? I said, he jumps in his face, plants a tube down him, inserts his seed in him, and later it comes bursting out of his stomach. And Dan goes, oh my God, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. And we just sat up all night and we wrote, and in 3 weeks, we had I would say, which is 85% of the plot, the structure. We didn't write the screenplay right there, of what you saw became Alien, 85%.
And whether they drew from other movies, they probably did, like everybody. They drew consciously or self-consciously from things like The Terror from Beyond Space, but they actually, the ingredient of this thing being incubated in a human being made the whole damn thing stand out.
Ronnie wanted to be on board once I had written the thing. He saw it as a, a viable thing he wanted to be involved with. So we made ourselves a little deal. He would be on board as a producer, and we started trotting it around and showing it to various, producing entities. And we got pretty close to deals in a couple of times, but they fell through, well, essentially because the people on the other end were demanding too much. They were trying to screw us.
And so we went to Roger Corman's company. But then I think we were dealing with Bob Reamy, who later became head of Universal. Corman was out of town. And he said, yes. So, right, that looks like a pretty amazing success story. He loved that Dan's movie was good, even though it didn't make money. He knew that I co-wrote this with Dan, though I'd never made a movie in my life because I took my name off the other. And we were going to make a deal, but we didn't get to signing the papers. Or Alien would have been made as a low-budget Corman movie.
A friend of ours named Mark Haggard ended up with a copy of it in his hands. He used to be an independent writer-director.
Mark said, "Can I read this great script they're all talking about you have?" And Dan said, "Sure." So, we gave him the script, and he just said, "Let's just wait a few days, and then we'll close our deal with Corman." Well, he calls us, of course, the same night. He said, "It's great, it's live, and I can get the money. I can get the money immediately." So we looked at each other, and we said, "Okay, well, look, we can't wait. We don't want to blow the deal with Corman. It's got to be a limited time." He said, 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks.
Mark Haggard knew Walter Hill, a director of tough guy movies. Gave it to Walter Hill. Walter Hill showed it to his partner, David Giler, and then they showed it to their third partner, Gordon Carroll. The three of them had just formed a new production company called Brandywine Films.
We had offices at the then Goldwyn Studios, now Warner Hollywood, and Walter's office was on the first floor, ground floor. And after lunch one day, he was sitting in his chair, ruminating, with the window open. And a friend of his was walking down the alleyway, and he stopped and said, "Walter."
This guy handed him the script through the window, and he read it, and he said, "Well, I may be out of my mind." He said, "I think this." He says, "But I mean, the script is terrible, but it has one great scene in it, and read it and tell me what you think." I read it, and I thought it was absolutely terrible. And I called him up, and I said, "What, you are nuts. This is crazy. Would you come to the big scene?" I said, "Yeah, you think jumps out, and it's on his face." He said, "That's not it." I said, "Look, I'm already on page 90. I said, he said, "Keep reading." And I came to the chest burster, and I called him back and said, "Well, I see what you mean."
They brought it to me. I thought it was interesting. A nice horror picture in outer space. I mean, what could sound better? And they then completely rewrote the script from top to bottom.
What I didn't understand when we made the deal with Brandywine, Giler and Hill, was that Giler and Hill wanted more than to produce this film. I didn't figure this out until, in fact, after principal photography. But they targeted my script since they decided they wanted all the credit for the screenplay, and they didn't want me to have any.
Right from the beginning, David and Walter did several drafts. And it was the whole character of the film, not the spine of it in terms of story, even though that was changed quite a bit. But the whole character of the film changed when Walter and David took it over.
As Walter himself said in one of the speeches he gave us during pre-production, he said, "The greatest thing I have to bring to this project is I don't know anything about science fiction and I don't like it." And that was certainly reflected in the various drafts that they did.
They took several cracks at drafts, and they, from all consensuses, they were getting worse, not better, because that wasn't their forte. They did recognize it was great, but they weren't good at making it better, or in fact at not making it even worse. To agree, I'm going to modify that with one exception. They made a huge contribution. But in the many drafts they did, most people felt it was losing. But that happens sometimes because you take a shot and then you sometimes come back to what attracted you in the first place. And they did radically. They did 8 different drafts.
For some reason I couldn't figure out, Walter Hill immediately started doing rewrites of my script. I remember walking into Gordon Carroll's office and seeing a script on the desk and lifting up the page, and it said Alien by Walter Hill. Gordon walks in. I said, "Gordon, what's this?" Gordon looked very embarrassed. He said, "Oh, you're not supposed to see that."
But they contributed one thing, which is one of the best things in the movie, and I will eternally be thankful to them, not only for starting the ball for financing, but to contributing this to the movie. What they invented was the robot. That was not in the movie, where the robot's Ash is a robot and his head comes off. That whole idea and scenario was theirs.
We rewrote it top to bottom. I mean, all of the dialogue, all the characters, the whole sense of truck drivers in space, the whole, plot with the robot, the whole with Ian Holm, with all the rest of that stuff. That's all in the new script.
The only thing I could see he was doing was just stirring around the elements. First thing he did was change the names of all of the characters. One early discussion, Walter walks into the offices there at 20th Century Fox, and he said, "I hate all those names in your script." He hates all the names. I mean, how do you hate a name? "Oh, I hate all those names." So he changed them all. Of course, he didn't hate them at all, but he had the naive idea that if he changed all of the characters' names, this would count somehow as being a substantial rewrite of the material.
With a story that's as often told as this kind of story is, you have to do it in a special way in order for it to be special. I mean, was our argument with about the movie in general with Fox all the time, and I think they agreed, which was that you had to treat this kind of B monster movie as though it were an A movie.
That script did not excite Fox enough for them to say, we want to go ahead and we want to make it. It must be remembered that this was pre-Star Wars. And we were confident, although we had other places we could set the film up, we were confident that Fox would ultimately, with another rewrite and whatever, would ultimately do it. We certainly hope so. And when Star Wars came out and was the extraordinary hit that it was, then suddenly science fiction became the hot genre.
I don't know that there was a consensus one way or the other about science fiction. I mean, since I was the responsible party for making Star Wars, and it was such a hit, concerns about science fiction went away very quickly.
They wanted to follow through on Star Wars, and they wanted to follow through fast. And the only spaceship script they had sitting on their desk was Alien. So they green-lighted it, wham.